Europe. Europe has a history of wars, colonization, and exploitation. In the past 3,000 years, there have been many long and devastating wars within Europe with more and more sophisticated weapons. Fights turned to wars which were enacted like sport events that were timed to start with blaring horns and drums, and fighters that were dressed up in colorful hats and uniforms. Stones were the first weapons, and then came sticks. String turned stones into slingshots, and sticks into bows and arrows. Then came metals, and the sticks turned to knives, and the clothes turned to armor that was so heavy that a horse had to be used. The slings got as big as they could get, and the sticks got as big as they could get. Then chemists discovered explosives which they made as big as they could make. With each development, the wars got shorter, more frequent, and more brutal. Wars decreased and peace increased during the first 1,000 years of history before Christ. Peace experienced its highest point in the first 500 years after Christ, when Christianity and Islam started to spread their wings. The frequency and length of wars greatly increased until they lasted many hundreds of years. When explosives started to be used as weapons, the wars became more brutal, shorter, and more frequent. Greeks introduced history, philosophy, humanism, and rationalism, which paved the way to individualism and nationalism. Romans introduced religion, law, technology, and government, which paved the way to democracy and freedom. 600 BC, Greeks were traders, and a growing population and shortage of land seemed to have created internal strife between the poor and the rich in many city-states. Athens, characterizing the cultured rich, and Sparta, characterizing the hardened poor, became rival states who fought a lot. Athens adopted democracy as a carrot on the stick to motivate the citizens to fight for their freedom and repel the invading Spartans. The advent of the democracy led to a golden age for the Athenians. Despite the constant fighting among Athens and Sparta, they helped each other repel invasions from Persia. In 300 BC, Alexander the Great conquered civilizations from Egypt to Persia and beyond till India and the Himalayas. He was tutored by Aristotle, who taught him horsemanship and inspired him to gather knowledge and accumulate it in great libraries for all mankind to exploit. By 0 AD, Romans, inspired by the Greeks and ruled by kings from various tribes, had spread their influence. Then, for 500 years, Europe was invaded from all sides by what they called barbarians: Goths, Vandals, and Huns. In 400 AD, Attila the Hun from Mongolia used the bow and arrow with horsemanship skills and battering rams to conquer Europe. His relatives became the monarchs of Europe. In 570 AD, Muhammad was born, and soon after Islam started to spread its wings. People fought and killed each other in the name of the same God. Because the people were so influenced by the church, kings and the church had very close relationships. The monarchs fought against each other, and the church married them with each other. Africa was exploited for her slaves. Slave trade started that lasted for the next 1,200 years. By 1000 AD, Europe was under the rulership of 5 kings: the kings of England, France, Spain, Russia, and the Catholic Church. The more power the church had, the more dark the history was, with fighting, intolerance, and suffering. The church called crusades against Muslims, which lasted the next 400 years. Up to 9 million people were killed, but it was great for opening up traffic and trade between the West and the East. In 1300, Marco Polo went all the way to China and India and started trade for silk and spices. Then the Turkish Ottoman Empire got in the way. In 1350, the pandemic called the Black Death killed half of the people in Europe. Then a war between the monarchies of England and France started and lasted 100 years, until Joan of Arc saved the day and claimed final victory. The war gave impetus to ideas for both French and English nationalism. It as well changed the art of making war from heavy armored knights on horses to light equipped foot soldiers with long bows and rifles. There was a growing consensus that the earth was a spherical ball after all, and in 1492 Spain sent Columbus sailing west to sail around the world to get to India, avoiding having to go through the Turkish Empire. When Columbus landed on land, he thought he landed on the east side of India and called the natives he met there Indians. The land was later called America. The Spanish did not find any spices there, but they took over the land and took over all the gold that the Incas collected. They brought back potatoes, corn, and tobacco. In 1500, explorers from England and France, looking for a northwest passage to the Orient, landed in the north of this new land and claimed the land for their sponsoring countries. In 1550, beaver fur hats became a trend that lasted 300 years. They were traded from the native Indians for alcohol. In 1600, settlements in the new land were started. Colonies were set up in India for her spices. By 1650, the Church's power was further weakened by the Protestant Reformation, initially sparked by the works of German theologian Martin Luther. The Reformation also damaged the Holy Roman Empire's power, as German princesses became divided between Protestant and Catholic faiths. This eventually led to the 30 Years' War, which devastated much of Europe, killing up to 11 million people. Many people fled religious persecution and sailed across the ocean to settle in America to persecute the native Indians. The influence of the Islam culture and its mathematics infected Europe and made it erupt in a period of rebirth. The Renaissance spread across Europe for the next 200 years. It saw the flowering of art, philosophy, music, and the sciences under the joint patronage of royalty, the nobility, the church, and an emerging merchant class. Many monarchs unified their respective nations, creating stable and centralized governments. Empires became nations. Inventions like the printing press allowed ideas to be mass printed and to be spread. That allowed ideas to spread to other inventions like the portable compass, portable clocks, and telescopes. This allowed ships to sail great distances and come back with great riches. This centralization allowed for an era of worldwide colonization and conquest, which paved the way for rapid economic growth in Europe. In 1770, Australia was discovered by England, and soon after it became a penal colony used to incarcerate prisoners. Over a period of 70 years, 160,000 convicts were incarcerated there. In 1776, America gained her freedom and independence from England. In 1789, the French revolted against the aristocracy, and for 10 years there was a reign of terror where many of the nobility perished under the guillotine. Napoleon rose to power and eventually conquered large parts of Europe before being defeated by England in 1815 in the Battle of Waterloo. More than 6 million people died. This opened up great opportunities in the new land that provided beaver hats to also provide timber for rebuilding all the houses and bridges that Napoleon destroyed. By 1800, the steam engine opened the way for the Industrial Revolution, which marks a major turning point in human history, opening up the way for the technological life we have at present. The life of the people greatly improved as it was seen that machines were cheaper than slaves. This greatly made the life of slaves and common man much easier. This freedom from misery that technology offered was never before experienced by the common man, and it whetted his appetite for more freedom. In 1848, people all over Europe unsuccessfully revolted against their monarchs for their freedom. In 1867, Canada gained her freedom from England. In 1901, Australia gained her freedom from England. That caused nations in Europe to scramble for Africa to get new colonies. In 1914, the heir king of Austria was assassinated in Serbia. In retaliation, Austria invaded Serbia, and Germany, showing solidarity, invaded France. Russia invaded Austria, and Germany invaded Russia, giving the Russians their chance to free themselves of their monarchy, just like the French did 100 years ago. World War I was fought for 4 years by France, England, and America against Austria, Germany, and Turkey. Because of great technological advances in firepower and the use of poisonous gas, more than 65 million people died. America saved the day and won the war. The victors severely punished the losers. The empires of Austria, Germany, and Turkey were dismantled and broken apart. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland in an attempt to regain losses after the First World War that it felt were unfair. A Second World War started that lasted 6 years and killed up to 72 million people. It was the same group fighting as in the First World War, with Japan helping the Germans. Both the Germans and the Russians had very crazy leaders. Hitler killed over 6 million Jews for fear of contaminating the German race, while Stalin killed millions for fear of losing his power. Russia and America saved France and England and won the war. This time, the victors did not punish the losers, but instead helped them to rebuild their country. Europe was divided, with control going to America and Russia. Russia got Hungary. Poland, and the east half of Germany. Like they were prisoners of war, Russia built an iron curtain around them and indoctrinated them to be communists. America, on the other hand, got the west part of Germany and indoctrinated them to be capitalists. The Second World War left the colonizers from Europe weakened. African states slowly started to gain their freedom. In 1950, Libya was the first to gain her freedom from Italy, losing it 20 years later to Gaddafi, who held the entire country hostage for 40 years. India also gained her freedom in 1950 from England, who treated India like it was a company. Mahatma Gandhi, with his peaceful, passive resistance movement, helped to achieve final freedom. In 1990, Poland and Hungary opened up the way for the Iron Curtain to fall. Poland elected anti-communists, and Hungary allowed people to cross the border and refused to shoot them. Soon, one country after another behind the Iron Curtain demanded their freedom, including Russia itself. In 1993, in an attempt to stop its long history of fighting, 27 countries formed a United States of Europe called EU. We can learn from Europe's history the art of making war. War is where technology flourishes. It is where our toys are made into our tools. War allows us to conquer and exploit people to the point where they have nothing to lose and fight for their freedom with their lives. Hopefully, the art of making peace by uniting as one and agreeing not to fight, that the Europeans have finally learned from Switzerland, will last as long as it has for Switzerland.